I am Jane Callahan, a member of the League of Women Voters Rochester. I would like to welcome all of you tonight, the candidates, the audience, and those viewing at a later time, to this forum sponsored by the League of Women Voters Rochester. We'd also like to thank our generous partners of tonight's forum, the Rochester Post-Bulletin, the Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce, the Rochester Public Library, and RCTC for their help. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan volunteer organization organized at the local, state, and national level to encourage citizens to participate in government. While we as a league do study and take stands on issues, we never endorse or support political parties or candidates. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates, not those of the League of Women Voters Rochester or any partner or sponsor of this forum. And the sponsorship of the forum is not an endorsement of any candidate. It is our purpose in sponsoring this forum to provide you with an opportunity to hear candidates discuss face-to-face issues that are important to you. Tonight's questions have come from the League of Women Voters Rochester, the Post-Bulletin, the Chamber of Commerce, and members of our audience. As there is never enough time to cover all of the issues in a limited time and settings such as this, please feel free to contact the candidates' campaign headquarters directly if your questions are not answered tonight. We'd like to thank all the candidates for running for office, for offering to serve their community, and for the enormous time, dedication, and commitment that running and serving demand. We encourage our members as individuals, as we encourage each of you to get involved in your community and the political party of your choice. All candidates who filed for office were invited to this forum. At least 2 candidates for a given office must be present in order to hold a forum for that office. And now we can move to our questions section tonight. Tonight's forum will be well, we'll say about 8 segments, and each will last approximately 2 minutes. And so I would like to welcome to tonight our 2 questioners over here from the Post-Bulletin. Hello, tell us your name.
I'm Heather Carlson. I'm Heather Carlson. I'm the political reporter for the Post-Bulletin.
Thank you. And from the Chamber of Commerce?
Chris Holloway with the Government Affairs Committee with the Chamber of Commerce.
Excellent. Candidates for the seat District 26A of the House of Representatives of the state of Minnesota are Tina Liebling and Breanna Bly. We're going to have 1-minute opening statements, and the candidate will then respond to questions in turn. The answers to the questions will also be 1 minute in length. And by random choice, Breanna Bly will give the first opening statement, and it will last 1 minute.
Thank you, and thank you to the League of Women Voters, Chamber of Commerce, and the Post-Bulletin for having us here and holding this forum, for RCTC graciously offering their facilities. I am pleased to be here tonight, and I'm pleased to be a candidate for the seat at 26A. And I have a reason that this seems like the right time for me to run. I think that part of the issue that our state has faced is in the extreme partisanship that we've seen happen. And having served 12 years on a nonpartisan board, I believe I have the skills that will allow me to go up there, hear and listen to all sides, and make good decisions coming together in common ground to better our state. And that is why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you. Tina Liebling.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to see everybody here tonight when we know you have another debate you could be watching. I've represented Rochester, part of Rochester, in the House of Representatives since 2005. And during that time, I have focused a lot of my effort on health and human services because healthcare and health research are so critical to Rochester and to everyone who lives here. And I can promise you I haven't had to fight for that assignment because that is a very complex area that many legislators do not want to learn. But this January, the state has to make some very critical decisions about how the new federal health care law is going to work in Minnesota. And for many people, this election is going to determine what kind of health insurance they will have, and for many, it will determine whether they have any. So I'm running again because Rochester needs a legislator with expertise in health care so we can make sure that the decisions that are made at the Capitol this year are good for Rochester.
Thank you, candidates. We will now turn to the Post Bulletin for the first question, and it will be addressed to Tina Liebling first and then Breanna Bly.
The state still owes K-12 schools $2.4 billion in deferred payments. What do you think the timeline should be for paying that back, and where should the funding come from to do that?
Well, we should pay it back as soon as reasonably possible, but I think that the bigger issue than how soon is to do it on a regular schedule, because I think certainty for the schools in many ways is as important as just having the money all at once. And you have to understand that this is really an accounting shift. It's not that the schools don't get the money, it's that they didn't get it one time when they expected it, and many of the schools had to borrow. So we are going to have an ongoing funding problem, a funding squeeze. I doubt we'll be able to pay it back all at once. We need to continue to look at making sure that where we're spending our money is efficient. We need to close loopholes in our tax system and make sure we're efficient with those. And I think that it's time that we're going to have to ask the wealthiest among us, those who can afford it, to pay a little more in taxes.
Thank you. Candidate Bly, same question.
Thank you. Well, that's a great question because I've been living with this shift for quite a while. I believe that it should be paid back, and it should be paid back as soon as possible. When we receive more revenue than we expected, I believe that in good faith, that money should have been paid back to the school districts. In Rochester, we've been fortunate that we had a 6% reserve fund balance that we were able to float, if you will, so that the state could look like they were balanced. As my opponent said, it was just a shift. But it's time to pay it back. School districts need to know that if the money is there and it is set aside for them, that they will be able to get it, because it puts districts in bind. We were fortunate not to have to borrow, but many of my colleagues around the state have had to borrow, and it has put them in uncertain circumstances. So I believe that that would be one of the first things that I would look at doing when I'm elected, and that is to pay back the shift.
Thank you. The next question comes from the chamber. Okay, we can't do that.
Do you support the creation of an evaluation system which includes teacher effectiveness with students?
Candidate Bly will answer first.
The question is, do I support an evaluation system for teachers?
That includes teacher effectiveness.
Absolutely. I believe that there are many ways out there to decide whether a teacher is being effective beyond just the standardized test that we currently have. Making sure that we have the best and most qualified teachers in front of our students is the absolute most important thing that we can do. There's a lady named Katie Haycock who is a brilliant researcher, and she has said that singly the most important thing for students in closing the gap and in their performance is to have a quality teacher in front of them. I believe that we have many, and I believe that we also should utilize these teachers to help us design an evaluation system. But I would go a little beyond that too. I don't think it's just that the teachers need an evaluation. I think that we need an evaluation system set in place for our administrators, because I believe that our administrators are key to the success of our building. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Candidate Lee.
Thank you. Well, I agree. I think it's important to evaluate teachers, not only so that the school district to know how they're performing, but so that the teachers know how they're performing. None of us really would like to just go on working without ever getting any feedback about how we're doing. I also agree that administrators should be evaluated, and that is in process. But the problem comes where you try to act on you try to say, let's keep the best teachers, when you don't have a way in place to say who they are, to know who they are. And that's the problem we got into in the last session when there was an attempt to try to get rid of the seniority system for layoffs. And people said, well, let's keep the best teachers. Well, that sounds great if you can figure out who they are and do it in a way that's fair. So that kind of a process is going on. I think that that's being worked on. I also think school districts should have a lot of input into that and should have a lot of control over how that process plays out. It should be a subject for negotiation in each school district as well.
May I use a rebuttal?
Yes, you may. There are 30-second rebuttals.
Thank you, and it's not necessarily to rebuttal other than to say I would not be in anything that is solely based on, and from what I've read, it was not based on just making sure we can get rid of our teachers with seniority. Our teachers with seniority are in some cases our very most stellar teachers. But I also believe that you should also find a system that allows them to be paid for that high quality. It should not just be, you haven't done something worth getting fired for, so therefore you move along in the system. And the people that I hear that most from, and they want someone there that can make that decision and do it fairly. Thank you.
Yes, and feel free to finish your
Oh,
sentence, even when the stop sign comes up. We're not quite that mean around here.
Well, and so that's what I was going to say. I believe teachers want that too. They want high quality teachers there, and they need someone up there that's not afraid to look at this and make that kind of decision.
Thank you. I should ask Tina Liebling, would you care to use one of your rebuttals at this time?
No.
Okay. We'll move next to a question from the League of Women Voters, and we'll go first to Tina Liebling. If the proposed constitutional amendment requiring all voters to show a photo ID before voting passes in November, what rules would you propose to implement the language of the amendment in 2013?
Wow, that's a pretty hard one to answer in 1 minute, and I'm certainly not an expert on those election issues, but I think it's very important that we do our best to make sure that people are allowed to vote. And I have to say that I think the one thing I think is very important for people to know about this amendment is that the language you're looking at on your ballot is not the language that is being put in the Constitution. I urge everybody to look at the actual language because it's about a lot more than voter ID. So even people who like the idea of a voter ID should really look carefully because it sets up a system of provisional ballots. It talks about equivalent verification and eligibility procedures between absentee voters and in-person voters. The voter ID is actually only required for in-person voters, not for absentee. So please look at that carefully as you're voting. It's not what it appears to be. And some Supreme Court justices, in fact, called it bait and switch, and I think that's what it is.
Breanna Bly.
Thank you. This is the only state that I have lived in that I have not had to show a picture ID. My father was a military officer, and we traveled, and I was first able to vote at 18, and I had to present a driver's license to show that I was who I was. I agree with Ms. Liebling. I believe that you need to make sure that all persons who legally can vote have the right to vote. And that's why I think it's crucial that whoever's elected this term is able to look at things that aren't just the fear, but how are we going to do that and come up with good solutions and listen to both sides, the concerns that both sides have on this issue, and why people are pushing for this voter ID and why people are not in favor of it. So I think when you come together and you look at what is best for the state, we have people that are giving their lives in other countries, women particularly, for the right to vote. We should hold it sacred, and we should make sure that all people that vote have the ability and are able to vote.
Thank you. Any rebuttals?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, you know, it's all well and good to say we're all going to come together and so on, but you have to realize this voter ID amendment, there was not one Democratic vote for it to put it on the ballot. So, you know, you have to wonder what was going on there. And I believe what was going on was an attempt to bypass the governor. And, you know, you're right, we should all work together. And we do try, and there are many issues on which we do. But the majority has a lot of power. And when they decide that they're not going to listen to any reason, there's really no way to make them. And for all the questions were never answered. They just went ahead and put it on the ballot.
would like to use, yes, thank you. I agree with that. I think that that's what's wrong. That's what I'm saying, what's wrong. We have two parties, and when the DFL were in charge and majority, we saw the same things happen. So how do we elect people that will go up there and from the beginning try to bring people together to find solutions? And if I am elected, that is exactly what I'll do on this. Instead of making people scared, find out what we need to do to assure that everyone that has the right to vote is able to do that.
Thank you. The next question will come from the Post Bulletin, and the first answer will come from Breanna Bly.
Last session, the City of Rochester's #1 priority was getting state funding to expand the Mayo Civic Center to add convention space. If elected, would you support these efforts? Why or why not?
Thank you. I believe that the Civic Center is an important part of Rochester. I believe that we utilize the money and we appreciate the revenue that comes from this. However, we have been running a deficit, and that's not acceptable. And so I think, just like, and also, how are we going to pay for the upkeep, which is kind of what got us into some of the disrepair we have right now. When I ask for a bonding referendum for a school, and I go to build a school, I have to be able to show, A, that we'll be able to maintain it and keep it in good working condition and make that case to the voters. I believe that if there's a solid business plan, that it addresses the continued deficit, and that we have a plan in place that would guarantee that it would be maintained and kept up, then I would be the one that would, I will push that bill forward. But those would be the conditions I would want to see.
Thank you. Tina Liebling.
Well, I've been a big supporter of the project. You know, this is partly about local control, and it's partly about supporting your community. The Rochester City Council are all elected by people in Rochester, and the staff and the elected officials do their homework. It's my job as a legislator to work with them behind the scenes to help them get a project that can be, that can get through the legislature. But I don't second guess and micromanage them on how they're going to run a project here in the city of Rochester. Now, I believe the Civic Center is infrastructure, and we don't ask our infrastructure to earn money. We don't ask our bridges to earn money. We put it there so that it can benefit our entire economy. And that's what the Civic Center, which is really a convention center project, that's what it does. And many businesses in Rochester will tell you that they need that to earn money in the private sector. Another thing is, if we require it to actually pay its way, you can bet that some business is going to want to take it over, and there are going to be people in the community that say, why is the public sector running this? It should be private. So I think we need to just make sure that we put infrastructure in place, and we don't require it to pay its way nickel for nickel.
Darn that we only have 3 rebuttals. I will pass. I will pass.
I'm sorry.
I've already used 2.
I understand. And now, from the Chamber of Commerce, a question for Tina Liebling first.
The private sector has changed its compensation model to become more affordable. Would you support adjusting public sector compensation to more align with the private sectors to become more affordable to taxpayers?
Again, this is not an area that I work in particular, but I believe that we get very good value from our public employees. They are in no way overpaid, and they have not had raises for years now. The big hullabaloo over the contract that was just approved, that if some of you were tracking this, that some of the legislators were saying that it was too generous and so on, is very much in line with what previous administrations had negotiated. So I think we're asking a lot from our public employees. We've cut the workforce a lot, so people are doing more work. Individuals are doing more work. And I think that they are fairly compensated. Now, if you can show me in a particular area, I would be open to that. But I see that in certain areas they're really underpaid. For example, we can't keep auditors in the Department of Revenue because they don't make anything close to what an auditor can make in the private sector. And that creates a real problem for us. So I'm not saying we shouldn't look at that, but I don't see it as a systemic problem.
Breanna Bly.
Would you repeat the question one more time?
The private sector has changed its compensation model to become more affordable. Would you support adjusting public sector compensation to more align with the private sectors to become more affordable to taxpayers?
Well, I am going to say what Ms. Liebling said as far as this is an area I'm not as up on as I will be shortly. But I do believe everything has to be looked at because the private sector is able to go out and raise dollars. The public sector is not. And yet the majority of the cost to many, for example, in the school district, is our employees. And so you have to be able to find a balance. And I don't think this is off the table. I think it has to be looked at. I think it has to be addressed because it's very difficult when salaries just continue to go up. Even if it's just rolling it up, for instance, in the school district by steps and lanes. For public employees, what their pay scale is. Oftentimes you start negotiations, you've already covered what you may have budgeted, like a 3% into your budget. That's already been taken by the normal progression of how the schedule works. So I do think we're going to have to look at it. I think it's going to be something like if we have areas, maybe it's not straight across the board, but if we have areas where we have to hire and pay a little more to do that, but in other areas we might have to be able, maybe we're paying a little too much.
Thank you. Any rebuttals?
No.
Okay, the next question is from the League of Women Voters. It goes to Breanna Bly first. What is your view of Minnesota aid to local governments? And have you noted any pros or cons associated with the program?
Minnesota aid to local governments. And have I noticed any pros or cons?
There you go.
Well, I think that that Minnesota aid to local governments is very important, and I believe they took a big hit. But it's a hit that has to be taken when you're looking at a deficit like the state is looking at. That's the hard part about this, is being able to look and see where it is that we can compensate in some areas and maybe find areas that we can cut some of that funding. I know that my colleagues in the city and the county have been frustrated by the cut in local aid, but I also know it's a reality that there's going to be a lot of us uncomfortable with some of the cuts that are going to have to be made over the next several years to maintain a balanced budget and to build a surplus so that we don't find ourselves doing creative things like adding fees or shifts or things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Tina Liebling.
Well, traditionally, or for the past how many years, the state has helped local governments in part because we require them to do certain things. So something like county program aid is kind of our block grant, if you will, because we require the counties to do a lot of the state's work. What happens when the state cuts back on these aids is that the local governments either cut their services or they have to go to property taxes, which are really the most hated tax, I would say, and probably the most unfair. So I would say we've gone too far in that direction, which is not to say that we don't have to kind of look at our formulas, because for instance, our local government aid formula, the one we give cities to help equalize property tax wealth a little bit across the state, it's a very arcane, very complicated formula. Maybe it doesn't work so well anymore. So we need to be looking at that, but I think it's a very important thing for the state to give aid to the local governments. It keeps property taxes down.
Thank you. Are there any rebuttals?
No.
Okay, this is our first question from the floor, and it goes first to Tina Liebling. What role should the legislature play in establishing rules and regulations for the growing industry of frac sand mining?
Well, glad you get to go first.
I think, environmental issues like frac sand mining really they have a statewide component and a local component. And this is not one that I am deeply, since this hasn't really hit my district per se, it's not one that I've really had to get into the nitty-gritty on. But
no pun intended.
No pun intended. But there is a local control. I think that local governments should have a role to play. But I also think that the state has the ability to do the studies and to to protect the environment in a way that local governments do not. So I do think the state should step in here and do the studies and at least sort of set the ground rules for the frac sand mining.
Thank you, Breanna Bly.
Thank you. I obviously have less information on this than you do. But I would agree that I think the state has the obligation to do some studies and do some reports. However, I think this should be no different than any other industry. And I think that the state and the federal government has rules and policies, and we should look at those and see how those spill over into the frack and sand mining, to see if what we have in place is enough. If what we have in place not only protects the environment, but at the same time allows job growth and job creation and resources and revenue for our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Any rebuttals here? All right, the next question from the floor, which will go first to Breanna Bly, is reproductive health care is an important issue at the state level. What is your position on reproductive choice and the accessibility of contraceptives for all women?
Wow. Contraception for all women. Well, I don't think the state should impose any legislation on all women when it comes to reproductive issues and health related to that. I think that we, especially local healthcare providers, are able to offer women the things that they need. And I think when the state comes in and steps over those boundaries and says, here's what you must do regardless of religious belief or social belief, I think that's gone too far. And I believe that this is a right and a responsibility that women have to look at what fits best for them. And if there are women that are not able to afford it, then certainly they have some opportunities and things available to them right now that they can get the help that they possibly need. But to have a state come in and force or mandate that this be provided, I think is overstepping the legislative bounds.
Thank you. Tina Liebling.
Well, I thought I heard a different question.
Well, you may have.
Maybe you should repeat the question, because I don't think what Breanna answered was the question I heard.
Maybe I'll rebuttal then and answer it right.
Okay, I'll reread it. Reproductive health care is an important issue at the state level. What is your position on reproductive choice and the accessibility of contraceptives for all women?
Well, I think the question there is really about reproductive choice, which is, getting into the abortion question.
Oh, well, then
I think I've been pretty clear that I support a woman's right to choose. And I think it's an important, I think Breanna was talking about privacy and keeping the state out of women's decisions, and I agree with that. That this is, I think most women have abortions only when they really feel pushed to the edge. It's a very private decision, and I think that it's the time when that's the time I want government to be small enough to stay out of our personal, intimate decisions. So I do very strongly hold that position. I also think that contraception, which is provided in some of our health programs, is a very critical thing as well, that women, even if they're poor, should really have the option to control their own reproductive health and make their own decisions. I think that's a pretty important concept.
Okay, any rebuttals?
Well, I just have to ask, did I answer that the way you wanted when it was looking at contraception, or are we talking about abortion?
This is not a TV thing, this is league sponsored. I am completely neutral.
Now, I'm just looking for some clarification.
But you can take 30 seconds.
I'll take 30 seconds and just clarify my
position.
position on abortion. My position on abortion is that life is sacred and there is sanctity in life. I believe only in extreme cases of rape, incest, or the life of the mother should an abortion be considered. And I know that's not going to be popular with some people. I also don't believe that government should be funding abortions. I believe that women, if they're in that situation, it is a very, very devastating situation for them to be in. And I believe that when they seek the counsel that they need, I am a daughter, an only child, and we've adopted. So for me, that's my stance on abortion.
Thank you. Any other rebuttals? I think we have time for one more from the floor before we move to the closing statements. And this will go first to Tina Liebling. Do you support tax increases of any kind to improve educational and social services for Minnesotans If so, what type of taxes?
Yeah, it's interesting, Breanna's talked about being nonpartisan and so on, and I brought with me a whole stack of negative
I know,
pieces,
girlfriend. I did not send those
that have
out.
been sent. Well, somebody thinks she's not very nonpartisan because they're sure spending a lot of money to get her elected. And what this is really about is whether people who can afford it should pay a little bit more in income tax. And throughout my career, I have tried to make the tax system a little bit more fair because we know that those who are the wealthiest are paying a smaller portion of their income in state and local taxes. These negative lit pieces make it try to sound like I'm trying to raise everybody's taxes, which is not true, because I think that we need services. The middle class has been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, cutting education, cutting healthcare, cutting things that people need. Also, the very wealthiest among us don't have to pay another nickel. And I think we can't afford that anymore. We need everybody to share. There are other taxes that we may need to look at, some to reduce perhaps, some to increase. We need to reshuffle the system, and we can't do that if it's too sacred to raise somebody's tax a nickel.
Breanna Bly.
Thank you. And may I just ask you to repeat that question, because I didn't know we were talking about campaign literature.
Do you support tax increases of any kind to improve educational and social services for Minnesotans? If so, what type of taxes?
Thank you. I believe that Minnesota is taxed to death. I was door knocking today and ran into a gentleman that has moved all 5 of his businesses, except one, to Florida. And he was getting ready to open up another 5-position business here in Rochester, paying $50,000 per position. And his accountant said, you cannot afford this. You cannot afford what you're going to have to pay in taxes if you stay in Minnesota. So he has now sold off all the equipment, cut his lease, and he's moved it all to Florida. We have enough taxes. However, in saying that, I will never be one, having been on the school board, to say I can never say never. I agree with Ms. Liebling. Everything is going to have to be looked at this session. Every single possibility. Who is paying what? I think we need a tax reform, and I think it needs to go on a percentage. I think if everybody was playing a flat 10, 20, 25, you name it, then you're going to cover what she's saying is not fair. So we have to have equity in the taxes.
Candidate Liebling, you would be entitled to a rebuttal, 30 seconds.
Yes, thank you. This idea that raising taxes for those who can afford it hurts small businesses is just a bunch of baloney. It's been shown to be baloney because income taxes are what you have left over after your deductions for your business. Also, we're not talking about a large amount. We're talking about maybe 1 or 1.5%. And this is your marginal income over some certain amount. So not a lot of money. I think a lot of the people I represent want to pay more, and they like it to go to education, or they like it to go to healthcare. I think people just want their, can I use my second rebuttal?
Go ahead, I'm out.
This is
Okay, I'll give you 30 seconds more because we didn't clarify that.
I think Minnesotans know that we get what we pay for in this state. And people want to know that they're getting value for their money, and they also want to know that their taxes are fair. It's time that we return to that kind of a system because there are things we need. We need a good education for our kids. We need to support our public institutions of higher education. That is what has made Minnesota a great place. And I also brought the paper showing, jobless rate ticks down to 5.8. The jobless rate in Rochester is like 4.7, it's low. Taxes are not hurting our economy here in Rochester.
Thank you, candidates. And now we will turn to closing arguments. And we reverse the order of the opening arguments, and Tina Liebling will speak first.
Well, thank you. Now I feel like I'm in court because we've got closing arguments. But, well, thank you all. Thank you all for being here. This is, it's very important, the direction that our state is going to take. I'm really surprised we didn't get any questions about health care because, again, health care is one of the most important things we're going to be dealing with in the next session. And health care, of course, is critical to Rochester. When we talk about Rochester's economy and we talk about jobs in Rochester, what are we talking about? Much of it is health care. So it matters to us as individuals, and it matters certainly to the economy of our city. And that is an area that I am prepared to lead in. The new healthcare law is very complicated. Whether you love it or hate it, it's the law, and we have to make it work for Minnesota. It's the Supreme Court pretty much dropped it in the lap of the states, and we have very important decisions to make. I expect if I'm reelected, I'll be a leader in making those decisions, and I try very hard to be responsive to my community. I work for you, and I ask for your vote.
Breanna Bly.
Thank you. I should have brought props. You did a great job with that. I wish I would have had some of that. You know, one of the things I like.
Send them to me.
Exactly. Not my folks. I want to address that a little bit, and you know this because you must have felt as heart sick as I felt the first time I saw one of those come out when you ran against Carla Nelson several years ago, and they send out 12 4-page color glossy brochures slamming her. It's nothing you and I can handle, or we can ask them to stop. Maybe that's another thing we should look at reforming. But how it is right now is this is the party politics that are going on. And I don't care what they sent out about me other than I hate it. But what I am committed to do is use the skills that I've developed on the school board to look and listen. Listening is the most key ingredient, and you can pull people together and find common ground. I've done it for 12 years, and I'm committed to doing it again in St. Paul. That is my pledge. I will represent all of Rochester as I have, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. That ends our forum.